building an indie business in the center of venture capital. I'm Alex Edmonds, and this is the Building an Indie Business podcast. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about storytelling and delivery, and this is about how to tell a better story and deliver your message better. And I'm going to talk about how you can do that, why you should do that, how I came up with the idea for this episode. I'm going to give you an example, a bad example, and then I'm going to say what's wrong with it, and then I'm going to improve it. And then we're going to talk about structure, how to structure a story, why focus on this, and the problems that you might run into while doing this for your podcast. Okay, so why do you want to be a better storyteller for your podcast? Because it makes your stories more interesting. So how can you make your stories more interesting? Providing more details, adding tone to your words, delivering your story better, meaning the voice, the way you say it, things like that. Delivery. Oh, I think I said delivery already. Structure. So every story has a beginning, middle, and an end. And that's usually the introduction, conflict, resolution. So, for example, in John Wick's dog gets killed. He needs to find the person who killed his dog, and then he, kills them. Okay. So why bring up storytelling and delivery? So I was watching this younger comedian. He's about my age. And I was watching his special, and I realized that it just wasn't funny. Like the way he was telling jokes, his stories. And then I realized it was because he was only really talking. He didn't have like a voice or anything. He was basically just talking like this, and he was telling jokes, and he had no delivery. And then I remember seeing him somewhere else, and it was the same thing. His joke was like this, and you could barely tell that he was joking. And then that made me think of other comedians that I love to listen to, and I love to hear their jokes. And I realized what they do versus what he does. And so other comedians, they use their voice. So Bill Burr has a bit about wanting to get a gun. And he talks about how he went into a gun store and started talking to the gun owner, and he used his southern accent. The gun owner, he talked like this kinda, and he said the gun had a nice spread. See, he used different voices to tell a story and make the story more interesting. And this is just like an average day thing. Normal people go into a gun store and they're not able to tell their experience in a gun store like this. Another example is Andrew Dice Clay. When he gives his opinion, he ends it with, "That's what I think." Sorry for yelling, but that's how he ends his story or his opinion. Something he says about his opinion. He ends it yelling, "That's what I think." And what this does is it catches your attention, and so if you zone out during his act, yelling, "That's what I think," will definitely get your attention back on track. And so why I bring this up is because as podcasters, we also use our voice, and we also have to tell stories. So podcasters should learn how to tell a story to use storytelling to get people to listen to their podcast. Okay, so the example I have. My example is I once convinced everyone in my class that my Russian friend was from Nebraska. So what's wrong with this story? Oh, that's the story. I forgot to say that. That's it. So what's wrong with this example? It's the start of the story. There's no meat. It's short, and it provides no value. It's not funny. There's no lesson. It's just there, hanging out. So how can this story be improved? I can add about how I did convince everyone that he was from Nebraska. So how I did that was every time he brought up his heritage, the fact that he was from Russia, I would interrupt him and say, "Don't you mean Nebraska?" And so he never really corrected me or stopped me from saying that, and that added to it. So yeah, I never let him bring up Russia. Another thing is that this was in college, right? I believe I said that. In college, and this was the fall semester. So we had a lot of holidays coming up at this time. It was October, November, and December. So every time a holiday came up, I would ask in front of the class, because I sat in the front row, about traditions in Nebraska. So I would say, "Hey, his name is Alex. Alex, what is a Halloween tradition in Nebraska?" And then he would just make something up, and it was really ridiculous and funny. Same thing with Thanksgiving in November, and same thing with Christmas in December. Okay, so how do I know people were convinced that he was actually from Nebraska? Someone actually asked him if he was really from Nebraska. Someone was like, "Oh, hey dude, are you actually from Nebraska?" And so, yeah, that made me believe that it actually worked, and I thought that was really funny. And also, you can add random anecdotes as well. Well, not random, but something related that might be funny to your story. So, one thing that I could say was that this joking around and this anecdote that I was creating was during the hardest college class I've ever taken, and I was happy to get a C in this class, C minus in this class, and I had already taken it before and I failed it, so I was retaking the class, but this joke was more important than me doing well in the class. I don't know, I just think that's funny. So, structure. It doesn't have to be, or you can create your own structure around the the introduction, the conflict, and the resolution. So, if you listen to this podcast constantly, you'll kind of notice that this podcast has its own structure, and it's not intro, problem, resolution. So the structure for this podcast is say something, why, an example. So I will say something like, I don't know. I don't have an example in my notes right now. Hold on. Okay. So I will say something like, use email to grow your podcast audience. And then I will say why, like, you can grow your podcast audience through email because you're sending the email directly to people. And then I will give you an example like, this podcast I listen to, Software Engineering Daily. I get an email from them every day. They have a podcast. And then I look at the email, and if I like the subject line of the email, I will listen to the episode that day. Okay. So, also, within the structure of say something, why, an example, I have specific things I bring up. So I bring up how to do something, like how to write the email, the benefits of the email, or doing email marketing for your podcast, or the problems that you will run into while doing email marketing for your podcast. Okay, so why focus on storytelling? it makes your podcast more interesting. When you do voices or you have like a structure and you're telling a proper story, it makes your podcast more interesting, and a more interesting podcast will get more listeners. Okay, another reason to focus on this is it can be applied to other places in life. So I was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked me about what I did in a previous job, and I kind of had I didn't know how to tell this woman what I did in my job, because it was kind of confusing. I was all over the place, so I kind of just said like, oh, I wrote emails, I helped write the copy of the website. I didn't talk about how, oh, the copy wasn't convincing, and I should have, the way I needed to write it was like, oh, no, I should have said it was like this, and I made it like this when I rewrote it. I didn't say that, and so I still got the job, but I was nervous about if I would get the job. So yeah, that's one way you can apply storytelling to other places in your life. Okay. Another reason why you should focus on this is because having a set structure for your episodes, it helps you write the episodes better, and it helps you focus on how to write that. Like, having a set structure allows you to not focus on how to structure the episode, and it helps you write better podcast episodes. So I've been doing this structure for at least the year, and if you notice, I think at the very least that my episodes have been getting better. What's the best? So the first episode I started doing this was the how to interview a guest, and I think that is probably one of my best episodes. And ever since then, I've been able to talk longer, and I've been able to sound coherent in the episodes and provide more value to the listeners. Okay. The final reason why you should focus on this is because people listen to your podcast to get value out of it. And if you aren't producing the best content that you can, you're wasting their time. And time is the only thing you can't get back. So don't waste your listeners' time. You should really be focusing on the listener and providing value that they want and producing things that they want, because it's their time being used to listen to your podcast. I didn't focus on the listener last year, and I really regret that. So I'm trying to provide more value this year to the listener. Okay, finally, the problems that you'll run into when you focus on storytelling, or just when you're doing storytelling. When you're focusing on storytelling, it will take time to develop a structure and learn how to structure your podcast and tell better stories for your podcast. And during this time, your episodes might sound really rough, and people might not like that, so you'll lose listeners. And also, people might not like the new structure, so they'll stop listening. But those who like the structure will be more loyal because you're providing better or more value to the listener. Okay, that's all I have for this episode. Thank you for listening. I forgot to mention the survey in the beginning of the episode. So if you are listening this far, please fill out the survey. I really appreciate it. If you would like to host an episode of the Open Podcast Community Podcast, reach out to me. Come join the Telegram chat. The forum is now open. The next episode is going to be about the forum. Just reach out to me. We'll talk about it. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day. Bye.